And all right, you're ready to go.
Welcome, everyone. We'll just give it another couple of minutes to let stragglers come in before we get started. Nice to see your faces, those of you who have your cameras on. Awesome. Welcome to the 2021 River Styx reading series. My name is Deborah Jackson Taffa, and I'm a board member and a very proud supporter of River Styx Literary Magazine, and I will be your host for the reading tonight. Remember that there is a $5 suggested donation, which you can pay through the link in the chat. And to get us started, I'd like to thank the following for their support: the Regional Arts Commission, the Missouri Arts Council, the Missouri Humanities Council, and the Kransberg Arts Foundation. And thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. And I was so excited about tonight's reading. I had a hard time concentrating on my own work today. It seems that we are in the midst of a Native American literary renaissance. It's been decades since we've had so many amazing Indigenous writers emerging to tell stories about their ancestors. And tonight we have 3 of the best. So please remember to keep yourselves muted while they read. And if you would like to give kudos or comments, feel free to use the chat box feature. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer. You can unmute yourself at the very end for that question and answer, or you can put your questions into the chat. But with no further ado, we will go ahead and turn it over to our readers. So first up, we have the amazing David Heska Wanbli Weiden, an enrolled citizen of the Sikanju Lakota Nation. He's the author of the novel Winter Counts, an indie-bound and Amazon bestseller, as well as a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. His book was named one of the best books of 2020 by NPR, Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, Amazon, Lit Reactor. The list goes on and on. There are so many organizations to name that I could name. Winter Counts was selected as an Amazon Best Mystery and Thriller of the Year, an Indie Next Pick, Best Noir Fiction and Best Debut of the Year, as well as a notable selection for Best Crime Novel by Crime Reads. Wyden is also the author of a children's book, Spotted Tail, which is a biography of the great Lakota leader and winner of the 2020 Spur Award from the Western Writers of America. He is the fiction editor for Anomaly, and he teaches creative writing at the Lighthouse Writers Workshop in Denver, the MFA program in writing and publishing at Vermont College of Fine Arts, and the low residency MFA program at Western Colorado University. Lucky students. He received his MFA in creative writing from the Institute of American Indian Arts. He also has a law degree from the University of Denver Stern College of Law and a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. Very impressive resume. And we'll let David go ahead and get started.
Well, I'm Petu Washte, Amachiapi, David Heska Wanbli Weiden. Thank you guys for having me tonight. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you to River Styx. And, it's just great to see here. Kelly, I don't think you and I have ever read together. So this is great. Abby and I, we read together at the Colorado Book Awards, or was that Vermont College? I can't even remember. Maybe both. Anyway, so it's been my honor to be invited here. So my bio, I do need to say, in the interest of being complete, I am no longer the fiction editor of Anomaly, formerly Drunken Boat. So and Anomaly, if you don't know, is a wonderful, wonderful journal that publishes great experimental and hybrid stuff. But I just had to step back a little bit because I'm under deadline for the next book. And so they're looking for a fiction editor. So anybody who wants to, I give a wholehearted thumbs up to Anomaly. So contact them and read their stuff. They're a great journal. Anyway, I'm just going to read a little bit tonight. So my debut novel is Winter Counts, which came out in August of 2020. It seems like a million years ago. Kelly, I imagine you must be feeling the same way, because I think your book came out a month before mine, and it just, it hasn't really stopped. This is my 5th reading in 3 days, and I'm just so honored that, people continue to be interested in this book and in the tale of Virgil Wounded Horse. There is a sequel coming out from HarperCollins, and I have 2 short stories featuring Virgil Wounded Horse, who is the hero of Winter Counts. There'll be a short story featuring Virgil in the BoucherCon anthology, which is an anthology of short stories for a big crime festival. And there will be a short story in a wonderful anthology called Midnight Hour, 20 crime fiction stories by authors of color. That's coming out in September, and I've got a Virgil story in that. And I've got lots of thank you. And I've got lots of readings coming up. I've got one in a couple of weeks. The book has been nominated for the Edgar Award for Best First Novel. And so I'll be doing a reading for them as well, April something. Anyway, so I'm just so delighted to share with you guys a little bit. Let me just read a little bit of Winter Counts. I'll just read 2 short sections. I have to give the trigger warnings, as the trigger warnings should be for profanity and violence. So if indeed you are offended by either of those, this would be a good time to turn off the mic. I just like to warn people. Let me give a little heads up on what Winter Counts is about. It's a story of a hired vigilante, Virgil Wounded Horse. He beats up people for money. And the reason that he beats up people for money is because of a federal law called the Major Crimes Act. The Major Crimes Act is a law that says that Native nations may not prosecute felony crimes that occur on their own lands. Instead, they must call up the FBI and the US Attorney's Office and send those cases over. But the FBI is declining to prosecute about 30% of all cases. That means people that have harmed children, have harmed women, have burned down houses, they are released and they are free to commit more crimes. This is an intolerable situation in Indian country. However, I think we're all celebrating tonight the confirmation of Deb Haaland. And so I have been, it's a wonderful thing. I have been contacted by a number of people, a couple of lawmakers, a dean of a major law school, and some other folks that have said this book has sparked some interest, and there may be some interest in trying to get this law amended, if not deleted. And so now how does that, what does the Major Crimes Act have to do with Winter Counts? If you can't get justice from the US government, you might call a hired vigilante like Virgil Wounded Horse. They actually exist on reservations. He will beat up people for money. He will beat up the person who hurt your child. He charges $100 for each bone he breaks and $100 for each tooth he knocks out. So this is the story, the first chapter of Winter Counts. I lean back in the seat of my old Ford Pinto, listening to the sounds coming from the depot, the reservation's only tavern. There was a stream of Indians and white ranchers going inside. I knew Gov Yellowhawk was there with his buddies, pounding beers and drinking shots. Gov taught gym at the local school, football, basketball, soccer. But Word was, he sometimes got a little too involved with his students, both boys and girls. I was going to let him get good and drunk, then the real party would start. I had brass knuckles and a baseball bat stowed in my trunk, but those wouldn't be necessary. Gov was a fat ass piece of shit with a fry bread gut as big as a buffalo's ass. I'd been hired to beat the hell out of Gov by the father of a little girl at the school. Gov had sneaked up on the girl in the bathroom, held her down, and raped her. The girl's parents had confronted the school's principal, but Gov came from one of the most powerful families on the res, and the school refused to take any action. The principal had even threatened a lawsuit against the parents for making a false accusation. Tribal police couldn't do anything. The feds prosecuted all felony crimes on the res, and they didn't mess with any crime short of murder. Now, the little girl was too scared to go back to her class, and he was free to molest other kids. I'd waived my fee for this job. Usually I charged $100 for each tooth I knocked out and each bone I broke, but I decided to kick Gov's ass for free. I'd hated him for years. Even as a teenager, he was a mean asshole who terrorized other kids, especially Ayeskas like me. Of course, Gov had always been accompanied by his gang. I couldn't remember him ever fighting solo. But tonight was his time. The stones, Gimme Shelter, drifted through the door of the bar to the parking lot, leaving little melodic ripples like ghosts in my head. I lit a cigarette and waited for Gov. He'd come out sooner or later. About an hour later, I spotted him walking out of the bar. He was singing an off-key tune and stumbling. I slipped out of my Pinto and I crouched behind his shiny new pickup. He'd parked at the far end of the lot so that no one would ding his expensive ride. That suited me just fine. I could enact some Indian justice away from any of Gov's drinking buddies. I moved out from the shadows. He wore faded jeans and a t-shirt with a Fighting Sioux mascot. His eyes were foggy and he stank of beer. I could see the birthmark on his forehead that looked like a little tomahawk. Hey, Gov. The fuck? He squinted into the darkness, unable to pinpoint who was speaking to him. It's Virgil. Who? Virgil Wounded Horse. Oh, are you drinking or what? The bar just closed. Yeah, I know it closed. I was waiting for you. What for? Grace Little Thunder. Gov's face darkened. Ain't seen her. That's not what I hear. I take care of the Wakaneja, show them how to be Lakota. Sometimes the parents, they don't appreciate it. The way of the world, huh? I move between Gov and his truck. I teach the kids, help their families. Sometimes they want more than I can give. St. Gov, just a guy who likes to cornhole the boys and finger the girls. You know how kids are. They want attention. They make shit up so people make a fuss over them. The other kids making shit up too? I heard about you and little Joey Dupree. Gov tried to move past me. I don't need this bullshit. I ain't seen you out there helping the Oyate. From what I hear, you don't do nothing. You got shit to say, take it up with Principal Smith. I'm getting out of here. I don't think so. Look, asshole, Grace Little Thunder's family is nothing but trash. Her mom's a drunk and her dad ain't worked in 10 years. That girl is only 9 years old. Eat shit. What business is it of yours? I landed a hard body shot to Gov's midsection. The punch would have knocked most men over, but his massive stomach absorbed most of the blow. Yeska, motherfucker. He snarled and lunged at me. I saw the move coming, sidestepped it, and smashed him in the jaw. He shook his head like a wet dog. How the fuck was he still standing up? I thought about grabbing the baseball bat. Then I felt a blinding pain in my side. A blow to the kidney, then another, this one worse than the first. Waves of electricity, neural impulses. Gotta stay up, don't go down or it's finished. Reeling, dizzy, I tried to puzzle out a strategy, but my mind was like an iceberg, slowly bobbing in the waters. You half-breed bastard, he roared. I felt his spittle on my face, and then I was on the ground. Shit, he kicked me in the back over and over, each blow a jackhammer. I tried to maneuver through the cloud in my brain. He panted, out of breath. He's running out of gas. Grab his feet, I thought. I staked my arm out and yanked his legs. He went down with a thud, and I saw my opening. I stood up, grabbed his right arm, and twisted it behind his back until I met some resistance. Then I twisted some more. "How you like that, you son of a bitch?" I said. He looked up at me and hissed, "Fuck you, Haffy." I had to hand it to him. He had some balls. I flashed back to high school when I'd been much smaller, not the big guy I was now. I remembered all the times I'd been held down and beaten by Gov and the other full-bloods, my angry tears, the humiliation still with me. I wondered if I should let Gov go, show him the mercy that I'd never been given. That was the Lakota way, wasn't it? Wakantognaka, one of the 7 Lakota values. It meant compassion, generosity, kindness, forgiveness. I remembered the lessons from my teachers back at school. They taught that the greatest honor, the greatest bravery came when a warrior chose to let his enemy go free and touched him with the coup stick. Legend was that even Crazy Horse had shown his courage by counting coup on a Pawnee warrior once, chasing him across the river, but deciding not to kill him to honor his bravery and grant him his freedom. I knew that the honorable thing to do, the Lakota way, was to set Gov free without any more punishment. Fuck that. I twisted his arm until it came loose from the socket with a sickening crunch. Then I stepped back and kicked him in the cheek with all my force, snapping his head back violently. I took my boot heel and smashed it down on his face, teeth snapping like stale potato chips. I kneeled down and grabbed his hair. "Listen to me, you goddamn scumbag. You ever touch another kid at that school, I'll cut your dick off and shove it down your throat. Hear me, Skin?" He didn't say anything. His left eye was swollen and bloody, and his nose, seemingly gone, pounded back into his face. Blood streamed from the black hole of his former nose and mouth. "How's that for counting coup, asshole?" I said. I leaned over to see if he was still breathing. A few faint breaths. I saw some teeth lying on the concrete. They looked like little yellow tombstones. I scooped them up and stuck them in my pocket. Thank you, guys.
Wow, thank you so much, David. That was an incredible reading. We're going to have up next is Abigail Chabitnoy. She's the author of How to Dress a Fish from Wesleyan Press. It was the winner of the 2020 Colorado Book Award for Poetry and shortlisted in the national category of the 2020 Griffin Prize. Oops. Could you guys hear me? Okay, good. I had a weird message on my screen. Okay, so where was I? It was the 2020 Colorado Book Award for Poetry and is shortlisted in the international category of the 2020 Griffin Prize for Poetry. She was a 2016 Peripheral Poets Fellow, and her poems have appeared in Hayden's Ferry Review, Boston Review, Tin House, Gulf Coast, among others. She earned her MFA in poetry at Colorado State University. She is a mentor for the Institute of American Indian Arts MFA in Creative Writing and an instructor at Lighthouse Writers Workshop. She is a Koniag descendant and member of the Tangirnaq Native Village in Kodiak. You can visit her website at salmonfisherpoet.com to read more about her work. And with nothing else to say, go ahead, Abigail, take it over.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and to the River Styx reading series and Kelly and David. It's so great to be here with you all. I also had a strange message pop up on my screen and had to make sure I was unmuted. So great to read with you all and to be here and to celebrate this literature. And David, that would be so amazing if to see real world impacts of literature to get people to rethink some of those laws and legislation and how they are hampering contemporary justice. So I'm going to read a little bit from my book, How to Dress a Fish, and then kind of skip modes to some of my new work that hopefully will be a book soon. And the first book, I guess I'll just, a little bit of background. It was really, it was my way of returning to my community and getting back in touch with some relatives that we had been separated from as a result of the United States boarding school assimilation policy. My great-grandfather went to the Carlisle Indian School from Alaska and never went home after that. And so the book deals with the rupture caused by that policy and the kind of void that it left in our family, but also how through language and poetry and story, I can gesture some sense of return and some kind of conversation and real relationships can be opened up through that. And so I'm gonna kind of focus more on, there's some historical poems, some kind of family history, and then some more mythopoeic kind of reimagining work throughout the book. And it's that latter that I think I'm going to read from a bit tonight. So trying to find a way to write myself into that story as well. Only the beginning is true each time. There was fire, there was a flood. There was one, she came from the water, who had to reshape the earth. She had to throw her mother bones over her shoulders each time. She had to throw her own bones, black fire rock bones, over her shoulders. And each rock she threw over her shoulders from the belly grew, and life grew in them. Ichanache. In the beginning, the bodies were too soft. They couldn't stand upright. They couldn't stand by the water. They folded in the wind in the beginning. So she made the bodies hard. She made the bodies too hard. The bodies were too hard and too many to move. They had metal arms and metal hearts pulled from the sea. They were hungry. Their bodies were hunger, but they couldn't move, couldn't see, couldn't hear. They perceived only rocks and repurposed metal. Clack, clack, clack. Fire and salt water to carry arms. They didn't know how to feed their hunger. I went down to the water to swim. I was afraid the water was black and heavy to move through. It coated my skin, my summer black skin. What a lovely body. Is she adopted? They closed the beach and filled bags with sand with every able body. In a box they put me, spruce and pining, sealed with mud, hot and wetted with fire, with blood under fire, and water from the sea until salt. A woman upstairs dying said, "Our lives depend on your fullness, on your thought." This woman, she took out her rib and placed it in my chest. My mother then gave me her lung. Then other women did the same until I didn't fit. Ways to sustain. If this is not the way these bones should be, if this is not the proper way they should lie, clean with care again, clean each joint thorough, each wave over again, set aside enough skin, bleach in the sun, grow taut, transparent, enough to reveal any shape, enough to remain water, tight for crossing over. And I think I'm going to switch over from there. A lot of the poems in that collection are untitled, and I sort of at least imagine them to be a kind of undercurrent throughout the work. I always joke that I would be a fiction writer if I could sustain that much focus and attention long enough. So instead, I write my stories through poems across the length of a work. So these next poems are from the collection I'm working on now, which is titled Anatomy of a Wave. So you can see my imagery has not drifted much farther yet. I'm still very influenced by the ocean and island landscape of my ancestors and my traditional homeland. I'm looking for a way to sound. The women catch in my throat, water, lung. How do you say the women are at the beach, wave after wave, standing on shore still? The water now to our throats. I am looking for a wave send where otherwise a field fallows. Listen, they cut my fingers, thin, fine, finet. My neck gild slit so I too could breathe, and I became aware another tongue carried deep in my throat. There was earth at the bottom, so I dug. There was a sea and a knife and a sacrifice. And looking back, I drank salt and all the words I am learning. Signs you are standing at the end. 2/3 of the country is in drought. The waters have all gone walking. Nuna kwa harluni. When white peaks crested the rolling hills behind our house, I knew it was time. We understand since we are children. Waves break waves, travel waves, do the wave. Did the wave make it across the room? Did the people who started it move across the room? Cause of death, traumatized. Cause of death, bad heart. Cause of death, exposure. I heard it was an accident in the end, in the breakers. There was no boat when I heard it. I took my sister and some others out the back door. The calm was not, and the neatly kept lawn was not. The sleeper wave was not. Too many teeth I saw too late. The wave would not be dove under. It turned snow, wet and heaving, and we were already running. After a field, I could hear every dead thing. How do we behave in the field? They asked for a story, the ones we'd have to leave behind, swallowed by the hoary mouth. Never ignore what someone tells you in a dream, once the woman said. You were trying to remember what someone said who is dead. Kuhianga chikamkin, lampak koashu. It's kind of exciting to get to read through new poems that don't have to be read in a certain order, but then it's also too much freedom, too much choice. All the Daughters. And this collection is very much informed about considering narratives of violence against women, against Indigenous people, and against the landscape, and how those narratives and those various manifestations of violence are related. And so pointing out some of these undercurrents, or looking at these undercurrents, and then also looking at language, in this case, my Indigenous Shujestun language, as a way of healing some of those violences and reimagining those landscapes. All the Daughters. Liminally fault or cause. Each morning and most afternoons, I brush against the moon. knock from its axis. Remember, I keep living because someone else does not. Though the fish in the desert share the shore's vertigo. What does water know of the want of our hands? You think it's just shallow, but if a man or a woman is sucked into the mud flats where before they were treading leisurely, the water or the dirt, if too cold to say it was leisurely, the man, the woman, or the water, but rather it wasn't certain they were drowning. Is it my fault they're there? Sea change, a gray, another father, another daughter swept in the current. Sea fault line, disambiguation, sea fracture or crevice, crevasse. The water is trending higher these days with or without my paper moon, and the wings in my corner are just for holding detritus. The cat's cradle hanging from the ceiling is a hazard, sure, but only if you come at it from the wrong angle, the work or the moon. Rivers string through maps, through days, through lips slipped grit. We keep living. And if each of these beings has agency, such as the dirt, you can hardly blame yourself if the tide goes out and they're left like sticks in the mud. Unless, of course, you have a boat and saw them struggling when there was still water enough to swim. How will you spin it? In August, girls sing songs and weave string figures to tangle the legs of the sun and slow its departure for winter. I would let go the sun for a fish or a bird to carry all the daughters across, and yes, the fathers and the mothers and the sons. How far have you had to run? The question to ask in such times is not why they jumped when the water was cold, what drew two bodies apart in the first place, the nature of the agency, the use of flapping. Shorelines can bewitch like that. We all want to be seen to shine. I'll just read a couple more here. Ironically, the poems I read from my book did feature women predominantly, but this book is primarily driven because someone asked me once why there weren't more women in that book, and they asked me where the women were. So you kind of got the concentrated scenes and poems with those women, but this book very much tries to center those voices and those relationships. And so, yeah, this next, all to say I'm going to skip that one. And this one, this poem was actually sparked from something my niece said, and I don't have children of my own. And I only have one niece and then a handful of nephews. And so that's been a great relationship to get to nurture as she grows. This poem for her is called Light Triptych. 1. Let's begin again. It was dark in the wolf. It was dark in the whale, in the shark. It was dark at the bottom of the sea where they threw the girl with no one, where they threw the girl who did not wish to marry. It was dark in the girl. Are you surprised? Bright lights still cast shadows. It was dark in the wolf, in the whale, in the shark. It was dark in the sea, in the girl. Except behind her sister's teeth when she opened her mouth to speak. 2. The rules of the game are simple, my brother's girl explained. She shined her light straight in my eye. When you see it, take it, and shine for the next to see. 3. I dreamt my teeth fell by the road. They were loose and I pulled and I left them fall. You convinced me to leave them where they lay, where I had dropped them. It was too late to turn around, you said. It was too late when I realized there were no others behind them. We continued down the road without teeth. She drank from the river, the girl left behind. She drank from the river until she could bend trees, lay their trunks over the water. She drank from the river until she had her fill of shine. And I will just read one more. And I see the word shine in this next poem too, so I'm going to skip that. It's not until you put a collection together that you realize just how narrow your interests might be. I'm going to end on, I think, this poem because it incorporates more of that language work. And it's so rare that I get an opportunity to speak my language and to an audience of people who will not know if I mispronounce it either. So the pressure is off. And I don't often translate in this work, but I will tell you the title of this poem, Kuliangwa Uchikamkin, is I Will Tell You a Story. So Kuliang Uchikamkin. I am afraid of most waters, but some days I too desire drowning. Drop my eye below the sight. Hello, black water. I wish some days I could put on my sister's skin to see the body other than my death. What if this river is wind? I don't really know about sharks and salmon after all. Swim, not swim. One must take care entering any body of modest depth. I will tell you a story. I feel more mouth than maw these days, more bird than fish. What we're missing, waves, an exact measurement of distance, a body in context, an appreciation for the size of a full-grown walrus. One dies soon. It used to be these events occurred hundreds of years apart. The story goes and grows until no bigger than a harbor seal, small and spotted, in need of saving and native to the wrong waters. Black water, bad weather. How do you know if you're holding a walrus, elephant, deer, or girl? Snow or ash? What if this wind is a river? Yatini ahuak ernarpak, chali ashanganger watuk. Koyana, thank you very much.
Well, it's such a gift to hear your works. It's just such a gift to hear your works in your own voices, I think. David's reading was so physical, and Abigail's words were just like waves. I really like the shine in them. Very beautiful, relaxing. So thank you so much for that powerful reading, Abigail, especially the newer work that I think is still probably very raw in its power and healing. It's just very generous of you to share that with us even before it's been published. And next up, we have Kelli Jo Ford. Kelli's debut novel in stories, Crooked Hallelujah, was longlisted for the PEN Hemingway Award for debut novel, the Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, and the Center for Fiction's first novel prize. She is the recipient of the Paris Review's 2019 Plimpton Prize, the Everett Southwest Literary Award, and a Native Arts and Cultures Foundation National Artist Fellowship. She teaches writing at the Institute of American Indian Arts. She is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. And you can find out more about her at her website, kellijoford.com. And we're welcoming her to read for us tonight. Hi, Kelli, thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thank you to River Styx Reading Series and Jason for helping set this up, and David and Abigail. I'm so happy to read with you all and finally get to connect like that. David, I feel like we've been just sort of circling each other all year, so it's nice to be here with all of you. So I've been going back and forth. Sometimes I know exactly what I want to read, and sometimes I just sort of go back and forth and try to see how the spirit moves me, I guess. But I guess I'll tell you a little bit about the book first. It is a novel in stories, so each chapter can hopefully be read as its own movement, but then together it tells a bigger story. And it follows, I think it's about 4 generations of women from this Cherokee family. Mostly it follows the youngest generations of Justine and Renee. And they moved from the Cherokee Nation, which is in kind of the northeastern corner of Oklahoma, to North Texas during the 1980s, during the oil bust. They're looking for a better life, but they get there, and that's not exactly how it shakes out, which I guess is what fiction is made up of. At its heart, I think it's a story about mothers and daughters. And I've been thinking a lot, I've been struggling to write the past year, trying to understand how to be creative during this pandemic with everything that's happening. And, you know, there's a little girl here at home with virtual 2nd grade, which is like 2-3 words that really should not go together, and work and fear and all this stuff. And it's just been really hard, but I've been trying to get back into it. And I think I'm realizing I'm always going to write about mothers and daughters. I think it's just kind of what I'm going to be drawn toward. But that's very much what Crooked Hallelujah is. I can show it to you. And it's also about faith and belief. This family, a harsh fundamentalist upbringing, follows the family. And I think faith, a deeply Christian fundamentalist faith. Some characters it breaks in the novel, and some people find great solace there. And that's very much pulling from my own experience growing up in the Cherokee Nation, in a family that was deeply, deeply religious and Christian, in ways that were both very isolating, but also rich in that insular community. Yeah, like a lot of conflicting thoughts when I think about it. And I kept going round and round with myself, I guess. And I think in a lot of ways, writing this book is writing my way toward home. I've been gone a long time. So I'll just jump in after that really, really long introduction. And I think that I'll start with, I'm going to see if I can read 2 shorter pieces. I tend to write very long stories. Every story is yearning to be its own novel, I've heard, which every short story writer wants to hear. But so I've got a couple of shorter pieces, and I'll see if I can read 2 shorter ones rather than starting a long one and not finishing it. This one is called The Care and Feeding of Goldfish. And these early stories in the book take place in a fictional town in the Cherokee Nation called Beulah Springs. The Care and Feeding of Goldfish. My mom, Justine, brags on how I set my own alarm and have since kindergarten. She was usually working the night shift, so I got up, dressed, and brushed my own teeth. Then I'd sneak into her and Kenny's room and sit on the edge of the bed, where she'd brush through the rats in my hair and pull it back in barrettes. I knew not to wake up Kenny. He didn't exactly work, not like Mom did, but he was on a night shift of some kind. If I whined about her pulling my hair, Mom shushed me with a brush upside the head or a good hard yank. Sometimes she'd rub the spot and kiss it real quick. I knew she was just tired and worried about Kenny getting mad, but on weekends when we had time to just be, she'd want to say sorry. And it was usually when we were watching cartoons and eating cereal, 2 things she never got to do when she was a kid because they were too religious for TV and too poor for cereal. She might say something like, Mama used to jerk me bald when I was little. It's a wonder I had any hair left to pigtail. Then she'd get lost in stories about being raised so strict and the switches and belts Lula took to her. My mom told these old stories like she talks about a lot of stuff, like it's a little bit of a favorite joke she loves to tell and a little bit of a sorry memory she wishes she could forget. She'd say, Lord and Mama, forgive me. And if she went on too long, then she'd close her eyes real tight and whisper, bless her, Jesus. They found a tumor in Lula's brain when I was just a baby. The doctors called the terrible spell she gets grand mal seizures, but Lula doesn't believe in doctors. She believes in God, and I think Lula breaks my mom's heart in more ways than she could ever count. I love you more than anything, my teeny weeny bean, Mom would say after she fixed my hair, and then she'd pull me into her arms and squeeze. And just when it felt like she wasn't ever going to let me go, she'd kiss me and point me toward the door. Then she'd stretch her never-ending arms and fingers to the ceiling, take a sip of water from a glass on the dresser, and fan her long black hair over her pillow. I'd drop a few flakes of fish food into the bowl for Blinky, grab the lunch Mom packed before bed, and catch the bus at the little pond out in front of the apartment manager's office. I didn't feel special using an alarm clock or locking the door with a key that hung from a string around my neck or walking myself down the sidewalk to wait with the other kids for a school bus. But I think it makes Mom proud to say I am and always have been perfect. After I heard somewhere that goldfish grow as big as their container, I kept after my mom to let me put Blinky in the pond. She always told me the same thing, that one, he'd freeze to death out there, and two, I was too damn tender-hearted. You'll be bawling for him as soon as you dump him, Reenie, she'd say and push her hair behind her ears. And I'm not getting you another fish if you let this one go. We got him at the carnival when Kenny, who was high on life and the wild turkey snuck in his boot, got to feeling happy and calling us a family. He said, I love you like my own, teeny Reenie, and forked over enough money for me to play all the games I wanted. Then he rubbed my hair so hard that one of my barrettes pulled out of my hair and fell into my eyes. Why Mom married him, I don't know. She was still half holy roller. Couldn't help it, I guess. She only wore a bun to keep her hair back at work, but she still wouldn't cut it. She parted it down the middle like a hippie, she said, and pulled it back in two barrettes just like mine. She didn't wear makeup and hadn't even started drinking in those days. I was used to Kenny and how he got, though. I even missed him sometimes when he took off with his buddies and didn't show up for a while. I came home from the carnival that night with an armload of junk, a little bowl of Blinky, and a mad hornet for a mom, because Kenny got mouthy and jealous after his happy bubbles popped. I couldn't get off the idea of setting Blinky free once I got on it. Maybe letting him out of his sad little bowl felt kind of like a good or right thing that God calls a person to do sometimes. Or maybe setting Blinky free to see if he got huge was just some kind of a science experiment to me, because I don't know if anybody can really love a fish. He was a good fish, though. He swam happy zigzags at the top of the bowl when I came into the room. He even let me feed him by hand when the apartment was quiet. I kept him for longer than I'd ever kept anything alive. The carnival came and left and came back, and I still had little Blinky swim in circles in our living room, watching us live our lives like a TV show he couldn't turn off. Mom and Kenny argued. Sure, sometimes they fought. I won't say I ever got used to it, but I did get used to laying awake in the dark after the sounds faded, feeling nervous they were going to pick back up again. The night of their big knockdown drag out, their last fight, I lay in bed with my pillow over my head for what seemed like half the night when it started getting real rough. That's when I busted through my bedroom door and saw Kenny holding Mom up against the wall by her jaw. He had her pushed up there so her neck looked long and skinny, kind of like the rooster I saw my cousin slaughter with a knife he'd just sharpened. Mom was calm as a rooster that day, and she looked as mean as him too, her eyes staring at Kenny, daring him. When she saw me, though, she started to tell me everything was going to be okay, trying to get me to go back to my room. Kenny kept his eyes on her and wouldn't let her down, so I kicked him. Then, on accident, I called him a sorry pissant motherfucker. Mom and Kenny froze in place. It shouldn't have been such a shock. What I hadn't heard from Kenny, I'd picked up from the apartment kids when we were hunting ghosts or making potions out of the junk we pulled from dumpsters. I wondered for a second if maybe we might all laugh, but Kenny kind of shook his head. Then he turned his red eyes back to Mom and started yelling. The way spit was flying off his lips, I could tell she wasn't going to take it much longer. So I took off to the kitchen and grabbed a butcher knife and ran at him screaming. His black mustache crinkled up like he couldn't believe I'd do such a thing. He dropped my mom, who slid to the floor and wrapped her arms around me. I held on to my knife and kept it aimed right at Kenny. He started backing up, blubbering about loving me like his own blood, patting behind him on the door until he found the handle. And once he got the door open, he stepped through it and didn't come back to say goodbye. I sat on the couch watching Mom cry while she packed up boxes and trash bags full of our stuff. Little Blinky was on the table next to the TV, just watching. We were going across town to Granny and Lula's, the only place we should have been ever as far as I was concerned. I knew Lula didn't like animals in the house, so I asked one more time to set Blinky free, and Mom said, "Reenie, do what you want with your fucking fish." Then she threw a roll of duct tape across the room, and I was out the door before she could gather herself to say sorry. For a while, we stopped by the apartments to say hi to Mrs. B and Bones, the old couple who ran the place and lived in an apartment behind the office. Mom called Miss B more wisp than woman. She had to pull an oxygen tank. She had to pull an oxygen tank, but her voice carried all the way across the parking lot to our apartment when she wanted it to. Bones towered over her, worrying over every little step she took. He had a dagger tattoo on his forearm that all us kids were sure meant he had killed somebody in prison. Not that he gave us any reason to think that. They'd always kept an eye on us when we waited for the bus, and sometimes even watched out for me after I got off the bus. When we came back, I always went straight to the pond and plopped down on my belly to look for Blinky. Sometimes I got close, so close that the tip of my nose dipped in the water and a goldfish came up and took a nibble. Every now and then Blinky would come up to the top of the water and take a piece of bread from my fingers. Miss B would shuffle outside, dragging her tank, and she'd stand there and smoke above me, talking about how I'd grown and complaining about the parties people were throwing. After catching up on the gossip, Mom would disappear to have it out with Kenny. Miss B would hand over the big plastic jar of fish food she kept in her desk drawer and gripe about all the fish that got dumped when people up and moved. Sometimes while my mom was gone, I'd feel bad for what I'd done to Kenny, or what I'd done to her and Kenny. There were more goldfish in the pond each time we stopped, until I wasn't sure that we had set Blinky free at all. The fish stayed on the surface looking for handouts and took on a sick yellow color. Miss B got wheezier and wheezier, and Bones stopped coming out to pass me butterscotch and tell me jokes. Mom stopped staying gone so long and coming back with red, crying eyes, and Blinky stopped coming to the top. He got bigger and bigger, I guess, until I wasn't even sure which fish he was. Then Miss B died, and my mom said Bones got so sad he started drinking again and lost the place. Later, a boy on the bus said that the new apartment manager yelled at some kids for throwing candy in the pond and said he was going to fill that stinking mosquito trap in with concrete. The boy said he guessed it was true because the pond was marked off with construction tape by evening and had a bunch of sacks of Quikrete stacked around it. I had to keep wiping my eyes with the sleeve of my shirt the rest of the ride home. I couldn't stop thinking about Blinky and all those little apartment fish flopping around on the sidewalk, suffocating. Mom's old Pinto and a couple of other cars were sitting out front when the bus dropped me off at Granny and Lula's. I ran into the house and slung my backpack onto the chair without catching the screen door behind me. Mom jumped. She had been sitting at the kitchen table, staring, rubbing a scar on her hand. She pushed me and thumped me hard on the arm and whispered, "Lula's been having spells. The saints have been in there with Granny praying." "Is she going to be okay?" I asked. "She's stubborn," Mom said. Her eyes started filling with tears. "She's been resting for a while now." "I got to go get Blinky," I said, and she looked at me like I was crazy. I told her that the new apartment manager was going to fill in the pond and all those fish were going to die. She looked at the clock and chewed her pinky nail. Instead of saying no, she said, "You don't have your bowl anymore." "It ain't big enough anyway," I said. "We got to take them to the lake. All of them. We got to set them free." For some reason, that was all it took. Mom stuffed some trash bags in her purse and rummaged beneath the kitchen sink for a metal bucket. Then we were out the door. It took us an hour to scoop up all those fish with the mop bucket. The manager kept trying to talk Mom into going on a date with him, but stayed out of our way. We splashed around in that mossy little pond with our pants rolled up, bumping heads and knocking elbows and butts. We didn't stop until we caught the last fish. Mom didn't even complain when I splashed her, so I splashed her some more. And once we got all the fish in the trash bag, Mom tied it off and lugged it into the back of the car. She spun gravel, taking off for Lake Tenkiller. Some of the fish were small, and some of them must have weighed 2 or 3 pounds. I got to thinking on the car ride that I wasn't even sure I'd seen Blinky. "What's up, Bean?" Mom asked. "I don't know if it's still in there," I said. "I think I saw him," she said. Pretty sure I did. Then I leaned my head against the window, watching the trees go by, and smiled. We pulled up to a public boat ramp and wrestled the big green trash bag onto the dock. We could only carry it a couple of steps before setting it down to rest. Then we got to the end of the dock, and Mom pulled at the knot in the bag with her teeth and helped me pour the water and the fish into Tinkiller. Those fish shot off in every direction like fireworks. A few did great leaping belly flops. A couple stayed close by the dock, coming up to the top every few seconds. And Mom and I sat there tossing them cracker crumbs and dangling our feet off the dock and watching the sun gather itself for bed. We got back to Granny and Lula's. The house was quiet. Granny stuck her head out the door to make sure we were okay and tell us Lula was finally sleeping. Me and Mom ate bologna sandwiches on the porch swing. Then we shared the sink while I got ready for bed and she got ready for work. I couldn't sleep with Granny when Lula was sick. So before my mom left, she tucked me into her bed and checked my alarm clock. "You're too tender-hearted, Rainy Bean," she said. Then she kissed my forehead and whispered, "Wish I was more like you," before she turned off the light. That night, I dreamed me and Mom were splashing around the banks of Tinkiller calling for Blinky. Granny and Lula were there. They were watching us from 2 lawn chairs they had sitting just in the edge of the water, and there was a glowing lantern between them. We waded all over the lake, but we couldn't find Blinky anywhere. I wanted to swim deeper, but Mom grabbed a hold of me and wouldn't let go. She kept saying that the water was full of cottonmouths, and then I realized that it was, and I was crying. But that's when Blinky appeared and all the snakes just scattered. Me and Mom started hugging and laughing at the sight of him. That fish was golden as the evening sky and big as a blue whale. He nudged me onto his back, and I put out my hand for Mom, and we waved goodbye to Granny and Lula. Then I hung onto his top fin, and Mom held on to me. Blinky dove all the way to the deepest part of the lake, chasing catfish and nosing great turtles, showing us all the treasures he had found down there. Mom's long black hair trailed behind us, and we didn't have any trouble breathing at all. We held on when he leapt for the sun, shimmying high up through the clouds until we splashed back down into the lake. I woke up just before my alarm went off. Mom was curled around me, sound asleep, so I eased out of her arms and turned off the alarm. She mumbled something and turned over onto her side, and I pulled the covers around her and lay down next to her for a long time, remembering how it felt to be moving through the water and clouds, both of us together. And I think that that is long enough. I don't need to read the other one. Thank you so much, everyone.
So beautiful. Really love that. Thank you for sharing it. It's touching what you had to say about writing about mothers and daughters. I think that the sort of brightness in that is something that's hard to do. It's really nice. We should move on to questions. Yeah, Marnie, I agree. She said that she found it very moving as well. We've seen the writers here really, I mean, we've seen history and faith and justice negotiated here. And I don't always enjoy when writers begin with some sort of a background information about their thought process or what they're doing. Sometimes it feels a little extra, but I was really struck by what each of you had to say. And it added something, I felt like, to the reading. And I don't know if anybody would want to talk a little bit more about when you go into a work, since all of your histories, all of your sort of ancestral weight that you carry in telling stories must feed the content to an extent, but each of you in very different ways. When you sit down to write, I guess my question is, how much of what you're doing is sort of thematically driven, like, you know, by your knowledge of the Major Crimes Act, or by the need to try to incorporate history in a thoughtful way, or how much of it is sort of organically felt and kind of happened upon by the images and the maybe the plot for fiction writers? That would be a question I might have. And everyone else, please start writing down questions or unmute yourself and jump in. I just threw out a question very quickly to get us started.
Well, I'll be happy to jump in if I'm coming in okay. You know, I started off writing winter counts thinking that it was going to be about the Major Crimes Act. So in my day job, I'm a professor of Native American Studies. And so I've been teaching about this for a long time. And I knew that I wanted that unjust law to be the driver of my book. And so I started with that. But I think this, for a lot of writers, once we get into the book, it changes over time. And I realized that I was really writing about identity. Virgil, my character, is Nyeska, which is a slur in Lakota for half-breed. And I realized that's what I was writing about. So it's interesting, you start off with one concept and then the work kind of evolves and it becomes something else. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the best way for it to happen in poetry as well, is starting with a thought, or for me, a kind of obsession with water, and playing with a specific story from my people, from my community, and playing on those themes, but then also seeing where they arrive at. Actually, my second collection, I was thinking that after my first collection was so project driven and so focused around a research idea, that I wanted to just write poems that I could read in any order and not necessarily be so tied to a narrative. And then when I put them all together, like, that was the big critique. It was like, oh, the narrative's almost there. You need to bring out the narrative more. And these poems are still telling this story in this way. So I think there are certainly some obsessions that I've just embraced, and then also just the nature of kind of that daily practice of returning to the work. But that's why I kind of like to write like at 5 a.m. before I've fully woken up, so that I can let a little bit of that kind of serendipity into the work, and let go a little bit of some of that left brain rational thinking a bit.
That's really interesting. I feel like particularly in the later editing parts of finishing Crooked Hallelujah, I really wished I'd had more of a grand plan, because I didn't at all. I didn't know that I was writing a book for a very long time. I was interested in writing. I wanted to write one good short story, and I was very much trying to evoke, I think, place. And in doing so, it felt like this family sprang from place. And I would just worry a short story until I felt like I couldn't do anything else with it, and it was what it was going to be. And then I'd move on to the next one. And eventually it just became clear they were a part of this bigger piece that ended up being very much deeply a part of me. I do feel like it was kind of a yearning for home and maybe nostalgia. I was a little girl who slept with my great grandmother, and who then left and kind of had that sort of safety and connection, I think, shattered. And so I think it was just something that I needed to work through and to write through in order to be able to maybe my next novel idea is an idea, and it's a foreign place for me to feel like I have this idea that I'd like to write about. I don't know how that happens. So if anybody has tips, that's kind of where I am. I have an idea and I've never written from an idea.
Oh, that's so interesting. I kind of feel that in your writing. It feels like it is very much about this. We do have a question that popped up. I'm so happy. This one is for Abigail from NAMI. It says, does what you need to write change with the language you choose to write in?
It's certainly informed by the language. And in this work especially, I wanted to use poetry as kind of my excuse. Like, I always make time to write poetry, and so I wanted to also incorporate time to learn words from my language, and so tied the two together and double the commitment, I suppose. And so my community in Kodiak does this really great word of the week language archive, where they'll post a word and they'll post that word in a sentence, and then they'll post a micro essay under that. And so, if the word is fish hook, they'll have the sentence, and then they'll talk about the significance of subsistence or fishing, or some kind of cultural practice, and looking at that both in historical times and also in the present, and how that tradition has been carried on. And so in that way, these individual words assumed so much more weight, and they meant, like, fish hook now to me means so much more than that. because I have that essay in my mind when I'm reading and making that association. And so how I incorporate that language into my work, then I let all of that information, all of that knowledge that I've learned from that essay sort of help direct the rest of the imagery in the poem. And so I've only ever tried to write one poem in Alutiiq, and I have yet to read it aloud in public because it's quite the task to work with these sounds and to work with like Roman letters that have different sounds than our alphabet does. So I have yet to ever read that one straight through, but it limits me in what I know how to say in that language, but it also then opens up these associations that I don't have in English. So it's kind of an interesting constraint that I'm looking forward to playing with a little bit more.
Do you have very many language speakers back home?
Not many, but the ones that are very active. It's at least Kodiak is a very small community, very small village. And so they're not a lot of speakers, but they have a lot of funding for their different cultural activities. Ironically, from the Big Valdez oil spill and the settlement from that has enabled them to, on the one hand, it wrecked their economy, but it's allowed them to have funding for these great cultural resources. And so they're doing a language nest program with preschool, and they're simultaneously teaching mothers and their children at the same time. And so there's a lot of active work in the community. And so they're creating new words and kind of neologisms and things as well to keep the language relevant. So it's really exciting to see. And I've taken one class online. I'm hoping to continue that and to, if not build fluency speaking, at least be able to read a little bit more than I currently can.
Well, those little mini essays beneath the words, that makes it so wonderful. It sounds like poetry in and of itself. I mean, language can be so contextual. You crack that word open and give it a meaning that has an indigenous, import. It's really beautiful that they're doing that. Kelli Jo, you have a question from Marnie. She's very interested in the novels and the novel in stories, like short stories that come together to create the novel. And she's wondering if you intended that for the book when you started. Did you know that it would come together as a novel in stories?
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you for the question, Marnie. I didn't, like I said, I didn't realize I was writing a book for a long time. I was not overly ambitious, I guess, in that way. I just felt like I wanted to practice like the art of the short story. But when it became clear, like this is like, the stories were too closely linked for just sort of a regular collection. And I just been writing kind of the same places and people from the very first story I ever wrote were characters who had different names, but looking back, they were very much kind of the same people. So what I ended up doing was I worked with my agent, who was like really endearingly patient, and worked hard to figure out how to start the book, which took a really long time because I wanted to introduce kind of a place, a very particular religion that's unfamiliar to most readers, and kind of introducing kind of like a culture, as well as this very particular family with their own particular troubles and joys and all that. So I went back and read Erdrich's novel and stories. I think of it as a novel and stories, Love Medicine, the start of that, so many times, because that is such a brilliant book, period. But also it's a brilliant way to open her first chapter or story is such a brilliant way to open that book. And I read that and I studied that and I thought about it so much, looking for kind of like Dylan Landis, who also has a linked collection. It happens to be right here, Normal People Don't Live Like This, or a novel and stories. She's called the way that Erdrich starts Love Medicine, putting the engine of the book up front. What's going to drive this collection of chapter stories? And so I worked really hard to do that. That's what a lot of the work was later, was figuring out how to start, and then what gaps were acceptable for readers who hadn't lived with the story for their entire life, and then what spaces need to be filled in. It was really challenging because I felt like I had all the spaces filled in my head. So it was hard, but yeah, that's what a lot of the work was later.
Very cool. We have two more questions, and then one is for David particularly. I'll come to that one next. This one is for everyone very quickly. Do you have other artistic practices or rituals that support you in your writing? Other things that you do when you need to feel creative?
I can jump in. The only artistic ritual I have really is just to get some peace and quiet with two kids. I just have to get up early and write before they start wanting things. You know, Kelly, I remember the second grade years and they were rough, but let me tell you, the teen years, you become the chauffeur. And so you're constantly driving everybody around everywhere. And so for me, those hours from 4 to 6 a.m., that's my artistic practice. It's just getting some peace and quiet and writing before it all starts getting crazy.
You've got me beat, but maybe because I only have to contend with 2 dogs rather than 2 kids. But I try and get up at 5 and get that hour at least before I have to start working on anybody else's needs or feeding them, or before the husband wakes up, and so that I can have that. It's a nice quiet. It's a different kind of quiet. Even if I'm alone in the middle of the afternoon, that 5 o'clock hour is just always for me been a really quiet time, that if I'm up that early, I'm only doing my own thing and I'm not yet aware of all of the other impending things that have to happen throughout the day, because I'm not fully awake yet, right? Like, so I can really keep that space, bridge that kind of dream sleep space and that kind of creative space. But I've also started doing more lino cut, linoleum block printing as well, that I'm really interested in looking into ways of playing with image and text. I wanted to be a fiction writer way back when, before all the fiction writer workshops told me that my stories lacked plot development and dialogue and character development and all those things that fiction writers really like, apparently. I was writing prose poems, but I'm still interested in how narratives get conveyed and built. And so I'm really looking forward to trying to do something with these graphics, with these images, with text, with fragments on an epic scale, but in pieces.
I used to have this really elaborate like ritual. I'd want to get up very, very early and read some kind of meditative text, and then I would meditate and then read something for like fiction or poems, and then write. That time does not exist for me anymore. So I'm still trying. It's just sort of like Harry tried to get up. It used to seem that my daughter was younger, especially the younger I got up, the earlier I got up, the earlier she gets up. So it's just like harried coffee and get in the bleary-eyed to the computer, and it's like hungry. So anyway, it's just sort of get in where it fits in. I like to like really kind of luxuriate in my time and thinking and walks and reading, and I don't know, that maybe those days will come again after the chauffeur period. Is that right, David? Maybe, I don't know. I guess you don't know what's on the other side.
Okay, David, there's a great question for you from Shane. He says, while writing Winter Counts, did you ever struggle with balancing social commentary? Was it difficult to not be too ham-fisted, but yet keep that prominent voice in behalf of social justice, like welding together the plot with the,
Well, first of all, hey, Shane, thanks for showing up tonight. If anybody doesn't know, Shane is a great emerging Native writer. I hope I'm going to say this right, Shane. Check out his book, Anoka. I'm pretty sure I say that right. So I wrote about it in the Millions a few months ago. So anyway, so Shane, thanks for coming. Let me answer the question. So did I struggle with balancing social commentary while writing? I did, and I've in fact been thinking about this very question right now because I was solicited by Writer's Digest a few weeks ago to write an article on this very topic. So I'm on deadline right now to crank out 2,000 words on this very question. And so, you know, I'll give you some of the early thoughts that I have on this sort of article that I'm writing. I think that the key in putting in social commentary into fiction is to do so in a way that furthers the story. You know, now some will say that you should never, ever put in like legal or political facts. It should only be in dialogue, but I disagree that you should only show and not tell. I do think you can do some telling. I think you can do some telling and bring in some background stuff in exposition and summary. You know, so I think that many writing teachers are doing their students a disservice by saying never put any of that stuff in summary and exposition. Having said that, you want to do it with a light enough touch that it doesn't become didactic or seem like an academic lecture, you know. So I very much was constantly aware of, am I giving too much legal and political background here? Is it just too pedantic? So again, a light touch is it. So I'll stop there. But thanks for the question, Shane.
Awesome. Jason, I think that's it. Yeah, if you can give me a nod, I think we're time out. Yeah, I could just check in with our editor here. All right. So thank you everyone so much for coming. I was so excited, and it went beyond my expectations. Just wonderful writers to have with us tonight, and a reminder to support them by buying their books. So I believe that Molly and Jason, they've put the links in the chats, but it's going to go away. It's also on our Facebook page, event page. If it's not there yet, it will be. And this recording will also be posted on YouTube if anyone wants to go back and listen to it again. And please join us for our April reading, and we'll see you next time. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Good night. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks again, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate it. This was well worth the wait. It was really frustrating this last year. I mean, I literally said yes, and you said yes 4 times, and I went back and said no 4 times, and it was really getting crazy. So I really appreciate everybody sticking in with me. Thank you so much. It was well worth it.
Thank you for having us, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Jason.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.